Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Transformational Astrology. Looking at the new moons and full moons, mostly we are right now, and we want to look at this new moon that's coming up on the 7th in the evening on Tuesday, May 7th. So let's go ahead and look at the chart. So you should be able to see the chart here, and it's got quite a few planets still in Aries. Last month was the Aries new moon. This month, now, and on May 7th, we have the Taurus new moon. And there's a lot of planets lined up in Taurus as well. All these planets in Aries and Taurus. And in fact, in this chart, which is the natural chart, Aries on the ascendant, Taurus, Gemini, all the way around the wheel, with the actual ascendant would be indicated in the TimePassages software with this horizontal line on 22 Scorpio, but that's just for the West Coast where we're located. So that's of less importance in this general chart diagram. Now, one thing I wanted to mention is all these planets, except for Saturn and Pluto, located in these two signs. And then we have new planets on the other side of the wheel here, but they're not really counted in the patterns. And in the patterns, which I think is unique to the TimePassages software, we identify this as a cluster leading Pluto. And a cluster, as you may know, is of course within 120 degrees or a trine. And you can see it very clearly here that Pluto is the beginning of this trine that goes around as far as the end of Taurus, the beginning of Gemini. So that's within 120 degrees, all of the normal planets, including the three outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. So that's kind of an interesting factor. The ruler of the ascendant, since we're considering this the natural chart, it's Aries on the ascendant, and that would be Mars ruling. So this is just something that the software does for you. Also identifying various features, you can click on so many things, like if you take a look at for example, the square between 0, 44, and 206, that is to say from Scorpio to Aquarius, that square, which is the Haumea-Pluto square I've been talking about quite a bit. It's one of these new planets beyond Pluto that are not very well understood yet, but I believe that it's having to do with the connection to nature and to natural law, to truth-telling, and I find invariably with strong Haumea, they always tell the truth. I say right action, right relationship, and truth-telling for both of these new ones, which are very similar in their orbital period. And they are called Haumea and Makemake, which is the creation goddess, Haumea, of the Hawaiian people and the creation god of the Rapa Nui of Easter Island. And both were very connected to cycles of nature, as most indigenous, I could say every indigenous culture is. So they have to do with connection to nature. The first fully officially named planets in our solar system that are named after indigenous gods and goddesses. So that's very interesting to me as well. But these are outside of the pattern, as I say, that is formed from from Pluto to the end of Taurus or the beginning of Gemini. And we have 5 planets actually in Taurus, including the Sun and Moon, including Uranus and Jupiter, which were conjunct on April 20th. So now the last cycle was a very intense cycle. The solar eclipse of the 8th was a very intense solar eclipse. This is less so, I feel. For one thing, Taurus itself is more peaceful. Taurus is more grounded, has to do with earth energy, the element of earth, has to do with pleasure of this life, of our bodies being in this world. And that's what we have going with Venus, the ruler of Taurus, also there. And then the Sun and Moon pretty close to Uranus, 4 degrees apart there, 4.5, and a little change, 4 3/4. This Uranus-Jupiter conjunction, which was exact on April 20th, is still a factor. Rick Tarnas would say that for 15 degrees on either side, it's a factor in the zeitgeist. And so we might ask ourselves, he talks about it in his book Cosmos and Psyche. And he talks about the specific Jupiter-Uranus pair as being having to do with inventiveness, new inventions popping up all over the place when they're active like this, and also brilliant ideas, a bit of a rebellious nature, a breakthrough, time for a paradigm shift, time for things to have a breakthrough. As you might expect from Uranus, which is, Jeff Green called it freedom from the known. Making your own tracks, departing from the tracks of society that surrounds us and forging new territory. So with Jupiter-Uranus, and I think people have been feeling the energy, it was a very intense cycle last time with the eclipse and also Jupiter-Uranus. That's still with us. It's only like 3 degrees apart now, exactly 3 degrees, 22:48, 22:25:48, 22:48 and 25:48. So that's still a factor, and you would say maybe even till the 15-degree mark. So I've looked at that, and it is up until July of this month, July 12th of this year. And it began as long ago as June of last year. So this is kind of a long, it's about a year that they stay this close together. Jupiter moves rather quickly compared to some of these other outer planets. But, you just might think about this last year, what it's been like up until the summer that's coming. And, all this talk about AI is certainly right in the money as far as what Rick Tarnas has to say about this conjunction. So it is a kind of the brilliance of invention, the thought that there is an invention that might change everything. Scientists do say, or mostly computer scientists, right, do say that as many as 40% of existing jobs may eventually be replaced, right? So that sounds like a bit of a structural change to the society itself. Now, what do we think about in our own lives as well? I think it is an opportunity right now. We're fading as far as the Mercury retrograde. Mercury was retrograde retrograde last month, retrograde in April, and then on the 25th of April, turned direct, but it takes a while before it regains its momentum and also covers its loss of zodiacal ground getting up to the point where it turned retrograde, which was at the 23-degree mark of Aries. And so until it gets a little bit further along, right now it's at 21. It was 27 when it turned retrograde. So until it gets up to 27 Aries, which won't be until the 13th. So from now until May 13th, the first couple of weeks of this month, we're still kind of in that what's called the retrograde shadow period, the post-retrograde shadow. And then it will be fully straightened out by mid-month, but it's already easing. So I think it is time to start thinking more positively about making decisions, what decisions may need to be made, moving forward with their lives, but it will be in a new way, will it not? I mean, here we have this amazing, and depending on how it hits your chart, if you have something at 22 or 21 degrees of a fixed sign, it's definitely going to be affecting you, and you would want to look at the planet involved and see how that planet is in your own chart natally, and think about what might be a new take on how that works out, what the dynamic is for you, for that planet. So we are involved with that Jupiter-Uranus still, and we also can think about Chiron. Chiron at 21 degrees now of Aries was at 19 in that eclipse, just recent eclipse. So was the Sun and Moon. The Sun and Moon and Chiron were completely a triple conjunction at the same degree in minutes. So bringing up Chiron, and then again, that depends on how it hits your chart as well. You'd want to see how 19-20 degrees hits your chart all around. But, generally speaking, it is a thoughtful time. It's a time when we've been in that meditative, reflective mode of the Mercury retrograde. So a time when we might be thinking more deeply about our lives, about where we're going, about what holds us back, about the possibility that inner wounding is a factor. The story, the typical story is that in childhood we had events that sometimes seemed very difficult to take, and we didn't want to go there, we didn't want to think about it. We walled it off from our consciousness, but it festers as a wound that we can't quite deal with, and we find ourselves sometimes taken out of ourselves with rage or with upset or with issues of self-worth, issues with authority sometimes from misplaced parental authority. So as we come to these and understand more about it, and as we decide to accept this about ourselves, it's not the end of the world. Everybody has these woundings or inner turmoil that can be dealt with, and then you can work with it, and you can start to accept yourself in that way and start to be able to extend a loving presence from your more mature adult self to that hurt place within you, which is kind of like a lost child within you. And when you can make friends with it, and when you can really accept yourself in those areas and be able to nurture and reparent, they say, you get to a better place where they're still there, but they don't have the impact. They're still there, but you can kind of deal. And once you get to that place, you're in a better place, and it won't interfere with your decisions. Sometimes we get afraid to go where we need to go, really, for our own growth, for our own evolution. And when we can work with it successfully, it does help us in that evolutionary process that we're all part of. We're all growing. We're all trying to be our most authentic version of ourselves. So I think that was up in the last cycle, the previous cycle that's just ending now. And I think it's a little bit up in this current cycle because, look, we have Mercury at 21 also, a little bit past position now. It was before it, obviously, earlier, but of Chiron. So Chiron is still in our consciousness with Mercury there. And depending also on where 21 degrees lands in your chart, and also remember 21 degrees Taurus was the conjunction point of Jupiter and Uranus at 21, 22, 20 degrees, something to think about if you know the degrees in your chart. And those degrees are always out of 30 because we say the degree is in the sign. And each sign is 30, 12 signs, 360 degrees in the circle. So that's how we figure those things, and that's why if you have something at 21 or 22, it's going to be an aspect like these aspects, although these are not trines or squares, which would be more like from 21 to 21, but they are rather, well, let's look at that actually. So we have 5 planets here in Taurus, and they're all making, to some extent, an angle to one of these new ones, Maki, which is at 9 degrees of Libra. So the 10 degrees of Taurus is 150 degrees to Libra. And if we put the mouse on that, in the TimePassages software, we do see, if you can read it, the status line below the chart, Venus in conjunct, fading 1.5 degrees. So it's already past, Venus is past the 9 degree mark. Venus is at 1040, so that's about 1.5 degrees off of 150 degree aspect. And then these other ones are even further from that, and they get to a place where we're going to consider them part of a 144 degree aspect, which is to say a biquintile. A quintile being 72 degrees, 1/5 of the circle, and a biquintile being twice that. So these are these three, if we put the mouse there, they're all identified as biquintile within 3 degrees for the sun and the moon. And then for Uranus, it's actually, let's see. Well, Uranus is considered sesquiquadrate, so that's getting beyond the biquintile. 135 degrees is the sesquiquadrate, where both Uranus and Jupiter participate in that. So there's a lot of aspects from all these planets to Maki, which is one of these new ones. And we also still have, of course, that square between Haumea and Pluto. So there's quite a bit of thinking about our internal moral compass at this time. We're kind of aware of that. What is the right thing to do? Can we do the right thing? What is the situation with the society? Can we help with that? Which is more what Maki comes in with, because it's more pragmatic, it's more activist in its manifestation. Haumea is more reflective, more just kind of philosophically involved with that concept of nature and the connection to nature. People with strong Haumea, by the way, they love pets, they love being in nature, they love wild things, wild animals. It's very characteristic. So it's interesting to see these new ones coming along, of course. And the Haumea-Pluto square, I think, has been very interesting from the standpoint of what's going on in the society, because we have this big issue about telling the truth. Everybody says the government lies, and they do. Everybody says, not everybody, but a lot of people understand that there might have been lies concerning who won the last election in 2020. There were claims of fraudulent election that were kind of disproven in the courts, and there was finally a judgment against Fox News that pushed the voting machines being in error. Dominion Voting Machines successfully sued for defamation, that they said that was knowingly done, but there was nothing wrong with the machines. It hurt their reputation. They were awarded, as you probably know, $787 billion, and that was about a year ago in April of 2023. And now I feel the same thing. This was active then, this same square. And now I feel that that's what's happening again now is, the lack of truth is on trial. Are you telling the truth? You're supposed to be telling the truth. You're supposed to be filing the accurate records about things. And all these things keep coming up in terms of the conflict or the controversy between various political factions now. So I think it's a fascinating time that way. And what I'm leading up to, I wanted to bring forward the idea that this particular timing in this particular new moon is that we also have Saturn. Saturn is at 17 degrees of Pisces, Pluto being at 2 degrees of Aquarius. That is a 45-degree aspect or semi-square. If we put the mouse on, we can see in the TimePassages software that semi-square is 0.1 degrees. So in other words, within a few minutes of a degree, because if you add 15 to 17, you get 2, and then one sign over is 45 degrees. So that factor that Saturn is actually semi-square to the Pluto, and incidentally also sesquiquadrate to the position of Haumea as well. So that makes this kind of a little, it's not going to last long. They go out of orb by next month, but this particular factor is activating the Haumea Pluto to some extent. So we may see that this month is a particularly interesting month that has consequences long term in terms of, are you telling the truth? And what are the consequences of not telling the truth? So I'll just put that out there that I think that's up. In this reading of the zeitgeist, what's going on for the zeitgeist, and it's also up for us to some extent as well individually as we contemplate, where am I being authentic and where am I not? Is there a place that I need to step up to the plate and fess up or tell the truth or come intervene? And so, there's all those moral issues or issues of what's the right thing to do, that does come up for us now. So that's most of what I had to say. There is a bit of an idealistic vein with Neptune being at 29 now of Pisces, about to cross into Aries. And eventually when Neptune crosses into Aries, not until 2026, we'll have Saturn with Neptune, which is another big of these big transits, the outer planet combinations that Rick Tarnas talked about in Cosmos and Psyche. If you haven't had a chance to check that book out, it's a fabulous book. He really nailed what these combinations have to offer to us in a historical perspective, which shows us about the archetypes. It does kind of demonstrate what the archetypes are. And I do think it's a little bit milder now. We're in a Taurus time frame. Also, the Sun and Moon are connected, by the way, by a sextile aspect to the position of Saturn. So this is kind of slowing down too. We're getting out of the Mercury retrograde, but this whole cycle has a lot of Saturn in it. So we may feel, and it is in Pisces also, so a bit of a preview of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction to come up, not for a while now, but it will eventually get to a point where it's starting to be felt. Not that far from now. And that is to say, Saturn with Neptune, recognizing the reality of what's beyond the physical plane. They're antithetical in the sense that Saturn represents the physical plane, and Neptune represents what's beyond the physical plane, spiritual ideas and entities in other planes of reality, other beyond this plane. So combining those, you either have the reality of the beyond is coming to our attention, and or fantasy and image of what we think we might have in the reality of the physical plane, maybe it's not as real as we thought, those kind of things. So that's interesting coming up in the future, and it will be within that 15-degree mark pretty soon here too. Well, actually, it's already within the 15-degree mark. I was thinking that was coming up, but it's actually already happening. So we're in that we're in that period that Tarnas identifies, and he talks about it in the past tense also. Not in Cosmos and Psyche. He left that combination. He didn't do every combination, so he left that combination out. But you can imagine it's a little bit difficult to deal with Saturn and Neptune coming together. Well, what do we have? So, it really is a time when we're in kind of an optimistic space, I believe. We're dealing with things. We have these issues that we're thinking about, but there is a strong Pluto, strong Jupiter. There's an optimistic kind of basis for things, and we have these things to think about, as we can see with Haumea and Pluto, that there is a seriousness to what we're up to and what the consequences are, as in terms of what our inner moral commitment is to each other and essentially to ourselves. So that's it. Let's see if I can transition back to the other point of view. And just to say, I hope I've entertained you with what's going on in the sky right now. It's so amazing that what goes on in the sky shows up as above, so below. It really is a fascinating thing. It's a mystical thing. It does show that there's more to this life than the simple logic of materialism. That's only a small part of the story, not the whole story. Something to think about, keep in mind. Take care.